the exam off with a practical, which will just be up here. We won't have any in back this time. I'll go through a complete review on Wednesday of the files and tell you about it, but we will have these slides and you'll have to tell me what these cells are. What's the food of choice, if you will, if you know what I'm talking about? What do these cells elevate in numbers when they're attacking? Allergens, good. And parasitic forms, all right, that's what you got. What's that? Platelet, all right, also known as a thrombocyte, part of the blood clotting cascade. I'll explain those questions. This is a obvious one, but if you don't know, that's a red blood cell, also known as a erythrocyte. Identify this cell, please. Basophil. The dark black granules are filled with what? Two chemicals. Histamine and heparin. Good. Histamine and heparin. Good. How about this dancing Snoopy? This cell is a neutrophil. It's the most common white blood cell we have. All right. Food of choice. Bacteria and fungus. Those elevate with bacterial or fungal infections. Good. This one? Lymphocyte. We'll start talking about lymphocytes today. Lymphocytes, there's two types of lymphocytes, B cells and T cells, which you'll be responsible for on your file. And the last one is a monocyte. About 4 times as big as a red blood cell, kidney-shaped nucleus, increases with bacteria or viral infections, all right? Bacterial or viral infections. That's a monocyte, big eater. Good. Up on the board are 2 examples that I have placed on your exam as well. Behind me is a CBC. These are the basic things of a CBC, which is a complete blood count. A complete blood count actually takes blood from a patient. You all have probably had that done when you go into a doctor and they say, I'm not sure, but let's take blood. And you get out there, and I just made up this data this morning, and I made up 2 of them for your final. It's on the last page. And here's the numbers that I've provided for you. You'll have to check the ones that are abnormal, out of the normal range, so that means you have to know the normal ranges, and then you have to provide a diagnosis of this patient, all right? And you just go down systematically and tell me whether this is high, low, or normal, is what I'd like you to do. What's this one? Low. White blood cells per cubic millimeter? Normal. Hematocrit? 38 to 48. Hemoglobin? Low. Platelet? N means normal. They don't put it in there. I'm just doing it for you. All right, they'll just leave it blank. That's normal. That's 250 ish to 500,000. Neutrophil normal. Lymphocyte normal. Eosinophil normal. Basophil normal. Monocyte normal. So what's the problem here? With the diff count, this is called a diff count. We look for high, lows, or normal? We look for the highs. Up here on the top, with the rest of these basic blood tests, we have to look at high and low both. And these are low, 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 and they all have to do with what? Anemia. Good. They all have to do with anemia. Good. Low red blood cell count, low hematocrit, which is the total number of red blood cells in a given sample. We did this last Wednesday. You guys remember that with the capillary tubes? All right, you guys did good for Wednesday. Thank you for helping with that lab and cleaning up. And then hemoglobin is also low. Normal counts for hemoglobin are 12 to 18 grams per deciliter, so this is low. So you can even go one step further, in my opinion, and not only diagnose this patient with anemia, but because hemoglobin's low, we probably have low iron, because you know iron is a major component of hemoglobin. and therefore we might call this iron deficient anemia. I don't ask you to do the next step, which is treatment, but if with a patient like this, they would probably take a look at gender, male versus female, because this is more common in females with menstruation, losing iron, and probably prescribe some type of iron supplement to see if we can get those numbers up. That makes sense? That's a CBC. I'll give you different numbers. We'll do some more on Wednesday. Make sure you're comfortable with evaluation. The biggest problem that I have or have seen with students is that you do need to know the normal values for these, which is kind of you have to put them all together. You're welcome to come in and on the exam, right on the back, all the normals down as soon as you walk in the door, so that you can kind of lock those in and use it as a guide when you're actually studying. We good on that? That'd be the first thing I'll recommend to you when you start the test is turn it over and write all the normals down so you don't have to remember them an hour later. You have an hour and 50 minutes for your final, which is next Monday at 8. Most of you'll be out of here in an hour. It's just a normal exam like we always have. All right, we good? Okay. Over here, we left you, when we started the lab, after the lab, we left you with blood typing, Punnett squares. Anybody worked on those over the weekend? We had 5 days. Don't lie to me. All right. Here's Punnett squares. I ask you to be able to evaluate this, and these are the questions that I will ask you on the exam. Probability and chance. And we flipped some coins the other day. What did I flip? 6 heads or tails or something this time? Pretty rare. Less than 1%. All right. Type O, type B. What's the first thing we do with Punnett square work? Is this phenotype or genotype? You biobonders. What's the phenotype? Anybody in here ever in your head gone, man, I don't know why I'd take biobonds as a prerequisite for this class. If you have, now you know that we start using it again. So you have to know genotype then. That's the first thing you do with a Punnett square problem. You gotta figure out genotype. Mom is little I, little I. It's your 2 genes that are coding for the O blood type. Dad is what? B. But I did not tell you whether he was, what's this? If the 2 genes are identical or the same, we call it what? Ooh, gay terms. If the 2 genes are the same, we call that homozygous. If the 2 genes are not the same, we call it heterozygous. 2 terms, you got it right there. You don't know what they are. Homozygous and heterozygous. And we don't know if the dad, whether it's homozygous or heterozygous, so how many Punnett squares do we have to work out? 2. 2. Good. So you set up the Punnett squares with the 2 possible combination scenarios on fertilization, and your square should look something like this. And when you fill it in, the resulting offspring is something like that. I'll write the phenotype back down for you. once you have it figured out. Now answer my questions. What's the probability that this couple have an O child? 2 out of 8, which is 25% is the answer. I wanted a percent. It's 0.25 when you do the calculation. 2 divided by 8 is 0.25 times 100 gives you a percentage. Answers are in multiple choice. So the answer's there. You just have to match it to yours. Now, second one's a little tricky. Read things carefully. What's the chance of 3 B's in a row? Chance equals probability to the nth power. What's the probability for a B? Probability for a B is 6 out of 8. Or 75%. You all on board with this? Because we got 6 out of 8 B's, different, not the O's anymore. Read the question. So we got probability equals 0.75 to the third power, which is 0.75 times 0.75 times 0.75. Which I can't figure that out in my head. Anybody got a calculator? Smartphone. 0.75 times 0.75. What are you thinking? 0.422. 0.422? All right. Well, is that right? 42% then? Okay, thank you. There's the answer on chance. Chance equals probability with the number of events. Good. Questions on that? Got anything? Piece of cake? Last page of your final. Just like that. I'll give you blood types, I'll give you CBCs. You guys figured all that 8 questions, 10 questions. Answers are all there, multiple choice. Good. Last topics we got to cover then this week is lymphatic, immune, and review. And we're in good shape. Good time. The lymphatic system and immune used to be the same chapter in our textbook, and then with HIV, our understanding of the immune system exploded, and they've now made it 2 chapters in our book, but I still consider it 1. It's basically the way that our body defends itself against foreign invaders. And lymph system, lymphatics is the green up here. And you'll notice that we've got the heart and the arteries and the veins going back to the heart. What actually happens is that when we get blood coming out of the heart and down through the arteries into the capillary beds, what happens in the capillary beds? Exchange gases and nutrients flow out and waste flows in. But really what's going on is this system coming down through the arteries, when it gets to the capillary bed, we're actually moving fluid into the tissue. Moving fluid into the tissue. And they estimate about 3 liters a day moves out through the capillary beds into the tissue. And we have to have a mechanism in our body to move that fluid back into circulation and get it back into the heart. And that's what the lymphatic system is. It's a vascular system, vessels, that are wherever you find blood capillaries in our body, you'll find lymphatic capillaries. And they're collecting this fluid, this plasma really, that's in the tissue and putting it back into circulation. When you get older, you get a lot more of this fluid out into your extremities and you'll see swelling. What's swelling called? Fluid swelling? Edema. Edema. If you don't know that term, write it down. E-D-E-M-A, which is fluid in the tissue. And we don't get good lymphatic return. And that's because coming out into the tissue, it's difficult to get that fluid back into blood vessels and back into the heart. So people often swell up, and that means we're not picking up the fluid. An easy way to do it is to lay a patient down and elevate their feet, because then the fluid actually is draining back to the heart by gravity. All right, if you stand up all day, you can get swollen legs and swollen ankles. That's fluid, that's edema. And it's because it's difficult to get that fluid back. So all the lymphatic system is a series of capillaries that will drain the fluid back into venous circulation. But as we're draining it back into venous circulation, we inspect it. And the inspection sites are called lymph nodes. And so lymph, which is the fluid, is just like plasma. Lymph is the fluid. Just like plasma, as we're moving that lymph back into circulation, we inspect it through structures called nodes, lymph nodes. And if you go into the physician's office and you go, boy, Doc, I feel awful. They take blood, they might take urine, and then they'll grab your neck. And they'll do this. What are they doing? They're feeling your lymph nodes. And if your lymph nodes are swollen and sore, and you can actually palpate them and feel them, you obviously get them, you've all been sick, I'm sure, so sometimes you get tender under your arms. Your lymph nodes are concentrated in your inguinal region, which is your groin, your axillary region, which is under your arm, and in your neck. And so you can easily palpate your nodes, and if they're swollen and sore, you're fighting an infection, because that fluid that was going back into circulation was not clean, and all of a sudden we bring our white blood cells into the lymph nodes, and we have a little attack on whatever it might have been, or whatever is in your system. That's why they check your nodes to see if they're swollen. If they are swollen, you get the blood test back, and it says, oh, looks like you have a bacterial infection you're fighting off. Then this is swollen nodes, a differential count that indicates bacterial infection. What 2 cells would be elevated? These are the tough stuff. What 2 cells would be elevated in a differential count with a bacterial infection? Neutrophils and myelocytes. Those 2 have the same food of choice, which is bacteria, and lymph nodes are swollen. What would they give you? Antibiotics, and send you on your way and say, call me in 3 to 5 days if you're not better. Has that ever happened to anybody? Sure. That's how it works. That's the lymph system. The immune system is what's going on in the lymph nodes, which is the battle or the war of our white blood cells against these foreign antigens. We all good on that? That's my little spiel introduction on the lymphatic system. It's not too bad because we've already studied veins, and you know what veins do and how they actually operate. So components of you guys can read, you've got your notes, so I'll go through and touch on the points that I know are important because I already wrote the final. Lymphatic system capillaries and collecting vessels. They receive fluid from the connective tissue. Capillaries dump about 3 liters a day into the tissue. So these are blood capillaries. You might note that the blood capillaries dump 3 liters a day into the tissue. We have to return it. Lymphatic returns it. VV means what? Anybody know that from exam 3? VV means blood volume. Blood volume. If we lose 3 liters of blood volume, we're now down to half of what we had. And when you have a low blood volume, you have low blood pressure. So lymphatic system return is very important to maintaining blood pressure. Structures that you should be aware of in the lymphatic system: lymph nodes, lymphoid organs. Lymph nodes are considered lymphoid organs, lymph vessels. The spleen, the thymus, and the tonsils are big lymphoid organs. Remember the spleen? If you don't remember the spleen, you got it right next to it. What's its main function? Red blood cell graveyard. It cleans up the red blood cells, the aged red blood cells. Anybody know where the thymus is? Remember the thymus? Good. Yeah, thymus is right up in here. Right up in here. All right. Thymus is, my thymus, it'd be hard to find. Anybody know why?
They shrink with age.
They shrink with age. Very good, very good. Your thymus is incredibly active in infancy, puberty, and youth. But what it's there for is to develop our immune system. And after about age 18, our immune system has pretty well developed, and the thymus is the only organ in our body that actually shrinks as we age. And so somebody like me, who's in his 50s, doesn't have much of a thymus. It'd be hard to find my thymus. Although I think that's changing, because 100 years ago, did people travel a lot? 100 years ago? 200 years ago? No, you might have been born. Most of my family's born in Harrisburg. Have I told you that story? I was born in Harrisburg. I didn't even know it. I was born in Indiana. And I started doing some family history. Apparently, my grandmother, who passed away, boy, 70 years ago. 70 years ago. Never knew. I was born in Harrisburg. I had 8 brothers and sisters. I didn't know that until I moved here. I've been here for 30 years. And they don't travel much. A big trip or spring break might have been over to Cannon Beach or something like that for somebody from Harrisburg 100 years ago. And so you weren't, my point is, you weren't exposed to a lot of new antigens. And then what happened? Planes came in. And in the 50s and 60s, people could fly from here to China. And if you think you go to China and your immune system's set when you're 18, no. You get to China, you're going to see a lot of things you've never seen before. Do they recommend shots before you go and travel internationally? Absolutely. And those shots are to protect you because your immune system is not primed for China or Japan or the Middle East or anything like that. And so that's why you have shots when you travel, because that's to prime and get our immune system ready. So my point is the thymus now, which 100 years ago could have deteriorated at 18 because you're pretty much going to Cannon Beach or Portland if you were born in Harrisburg, Oregon. Now that you're traveling around the world, the thymus may stick around a little bit longer, and they're actually finding thymic tissue a much larger size now because we're exposed to so many more things in this world with travel, with planes, automobiles, trains, planes, going. The thymus tissue may make a comeback. Lymphatic vessels. You know what lymph is. Lymph is the fluid in the lymphatic system. It's much like plasma. Much like plasma. Clear fluid, no red blood cells. A little higher in waste than plasma. Lymphatic capillaries have a one-way valve system, single layer of endothelium, and incredibly permeable. Permeable. Go back to this picture. Here's the end of the lymphatic capillaries. They stick their little thumb into blood capillaries, and blood capillaries are leaky, but things move by high to low, high to low, high to low. That's simple diffusion. So if I'm coming through a blood capillary and I'm high in oxygen, I'm going to move to an area of low oxygen. So we move a lot of things just by simple diffusion from the blood into the tissue. And then once it's out in the tissue, we have to recollect it. And so how we recollect it is, if it's high in the tissue, like waste is high in the tissue and it's low in here, things move low to high or high to low? Do things move low to high or high to low? They move high to low, high to low, high to low. Write that down. They move high to low. And so we're going to move from the tissue. Anything high in the tissue like waste and fluid will move into this very permeable capillary. And here is the one-way valve. It's a single endothelial cell. And if you get a higher pressure out here of something, this valve will open, things move into the lymphatic capillary, and then the valve closes back up. So it's a one-way valve, and we trap it in the lymphatic system. And then we now have waste and fluid in a vessel in our body, in my foot. How am I going to get that back to my heart? Because that's where it's going. How do we get venous blood back to my heart?
Muscle movement, valves.
Muscle movement, valves, and breathing. Same for lymphatic system. All right, same 3 parameters are used. If I do this, up and down with my legs, I am moving all of my venous blood and all of my lymphatic fluid back toward my heart. And if I just stand here and do nothing for an hour, all of this blood and lymph is gonna stay trapped in my foot. Am I gonna get swollen? Yeah, so people who are on their feet all day often have swollen ankles and swollen legs because their fluid is down and being trapped and not returned to their heart. All right. The old bank tellers. I don't know if you guys remember this. You guys are too young, but when I was younger, you'd go to the bank and the tellers would be standing all day, 8 hours. A lot of times when I was younger, where I grew up in the Midwest, they'd also have a cigarette or two, and they'd be smoking at the bank, and they'd be standing there for 8 hours. And they had what we call varicose veins developed over years because of smoking and no venous return and being on their feet all day long. A lot of bank tellers would have problems with their legs, lower legs, and blood pressure issues. So, we have lymphatic capillaries wherever we have venous capillaries. Other things to know? Lymphatic vessels will all join together, and we're eventually going to return this lymph through two ducts, the thoracic and the lymphatic ducts, which are going to dump the lymph back into blood circulation in the venous system up toward the heart. The venous vessels have valves just like the veins have valves. All right. Lymph nodes, small organs. I already told you they're typically situated in the groin axilla or neck region. Axilla is axillary, that's the armpit. They're enclosed in a fibrous capsule. They have little beams in them called trabeculae, and there are afferent and efferent vessels. You guys remember those terms? Afferent and efferent? We used them before with what? Neurons, all right, but for lymph nodes, you got a lymph node here, and you've got afferents going in and efferents going out. That will work. So what's in these vessels is this is a lymph node. We're going through. There's lymph in here. And when it gets to the lymph node, what do we do with that lymph? So we're recollecting fluid from the body. We're taking it back. The afferents are coming in. What do we do with that fluid, that lymph fluid?
Process it.
It's called immune surveillance. We actually check it out. We look at it. Is there anything bad in it that we don't want to actually send back into circulation? So we have our lymphocytes and our monocytes hanging out in here. It's kind of like a border crossing, if you will, that it comes in and we get full inspection of the lymph before we dump it back into the blood. I drew this on purpose. How many efferent vessels are there?
4.
Efferent. 1, 2. How many afferent? 4. What do you think that does to flow as fluid goes through the lymph node? Speed it up or slow it down? Slows it down. We can actually take a good look at the lymph and make sure that tissue fluid is clean. It's clean. Just like going up to Portland, which I'll be doing this week. You go from 4 lanes to 2 lanes. What's that do to traffic? Slows it down. Trust me, slows it down. 4 lanes to 2 lanes, slows it down. Same idea as the lymph node, slows things down. Cancer cells. Sometimes we get a cancer cell that sneaks in here. Little red dots are cancer cells, they sneak in, and I told you there were some little beams. Little beams. What are the little beams called in here that will actually slow flow down as well? Trabeculae, good. Those are trabeculae in green. The little beams inside the lymph nodes. They will slow flow down. Unfortunately, cancer cells can come in here. And they kind of like it here. There's fluid, there's nutrients, it's a slow flow. It's like a little hot tub. And cancer cells can proliferate here. even though that we have these monocytes and macrophages there, these can become little cancer hotels. And so do they ever check for lymph nodes for the patient who has cancer? Yeah, they want to see how far that cancer has grown. Breast cancer, they'll want to look at the breast tissue and see if it's metastasized. You guys know that term? Metastasis? That is the growth and development of more cells. And they want to see if the cancer is localized in the breast tissue or if it's metastasized to the lymph system. Once it's in the lymph system, it can then grow and develop, and then, hey, it fills up. It's gonna go on down the road. Takes the efferent exit, and comes up, and oh, guess what's down here? There's another lymph node. And all of a sudden, it starts regenerating again. And then it might move again. So once it hits cancer, hits the lymph system, you have to really know how far it's gone and what the extent of metastasis is. Because the more it metastasized, the tougher it is going to be to beat that type of cancer. Spleen, largest lymphoid organ, filters the bloodstream, red blood cells and bacteria especially. Site for lymphocyte proliferation, and it does immune surveillance, which means we're looking at the blood as it goes through there, making sure there's no abnormalities in there. Spleen goes down, what organ takes over? If you damage and have to have your spleen removed. Liver. Liver, good. Thymus. Deep sternum and bilobe, size increases in child, atrophies in adult. I told you this already. The thymus is the only organ I know of in the body that actually deteriorates with age. All right, inside. It's a site for T-cell immunocompetence. That's where those are T cells or lymphocytes, if you haven't figured that out yet. So these are T lymphocytes. That's where they go to mature. So as children are developing their immune system, they'll send off the best of the best, the warriors. It's the Top Gun school for T cells. And only the best ones will actually mature into competent T cells in the thymus. Tonsils are considered lymphoid tissue as well. Palatine, lingual, and pharyngeal tonsils are the three pairs of tonsils. You guys kind of know they're around the oral and pharyngeal cavities in our body. Very common in the 50s, 40s, 50s, and 60s if you had inflamed tonsils to go into the hospital and have them removed. Tonsillectomy. You guys ever heard of those? Some of you may have had some of yours removed as well. Now they realize that that's actually just taking out immune tissue. That is, when the tonsils are inflamed, that means you have an infection. Now, people who have chronic tonsillitis, where the tonsils are continually being infected, they will maybe remove those because they can affect sleeping and airway problems. But typically, they will try to treat it with medication now and not remove tonsils because it would be like taking out a lymph node. Lymph node gets inflamed. Under my arm, if I got a lymph node inflamed this morning, do you just go in and take it out? No. That's what the old tonsillectomy was like. If you had an inflamed tonsil, they just take it out. They don't do that anymore. Thank goodness. Pyrus patches. I like these. Star these. They're on the test. I like them. These are specialized lymph nodes around our intestines. Around our intestines. Pyrus patches. Specialized lymph nodes around the intestines. Where do most of the bacteria that we get in our body come from? You guys know? Two ways we get bacteria in our body. One, breathing. Breathing. Just breathe bacteria in. Luckily, we have an oral cavity and a nasal cavity that are full of mucus and cilia that try to trap that bacteria. Second most prevalent way, or actually they're both prevalent, so let's not list them as one and two. Another common way for bacteria to get in is on our food. It's on our food. And that food goes into our stomach. And luckily the stomach, anybody know the pH in the stomach? Really acidic, like 2 to 4, which is very, very acidic. And that kills most of the bacteria. But if the bacteria moves forward and we absorb it in our intestines, we want to make sure that we have a immune system there in the intestines called Pyrus patches that will take care of residual bacteria. I know you guys do this, you go home today, you're like, I'm hungry, and you're gonna start making a tuna sandwich on your counter at home, and you throw the bread down, all right? You don't know that your roommate the morning before had cleaned the kitty litter box right there, and now you're making a sandwich out of something, and that's how you get bacteria in your body constantly every day. Nobody's that clean. Even when you bleach your counters down now, bacteria is getting pretty smart and is getting to be, there are bleach resistant bacteria now that have developed as well. So as clean as you think it is, you gotta be careful. Not sure if I should tell you that story now. I think I'm gonna wait, it's on our time, but at MP3, I'll tell you the pinworm story. Remind me when we get the digestive system to tell you the pinworm story. It's classic. Questions on that?